Starting on Thursday, millions of people across the country will watch players walk across a stage as they are drafted to be part of the NFL. Entering its 100th year as an organization, the National Football League is the largest sports entity in the world, and one of its original teams was right here in Rochester. The year was 1920, a decade that was ready to roar. Women gained the right to vote, the first radio station hit the airwaves, and football teams, mostly from Ohio, joined with one from Rochester, New York, to form what would become the National Football League. The Rochester Jeffersons had a proud history prior to the NFL. As a semi-pro team, they were regarded as the best in New York State, and team owner Leo Lyons had dreams of turning his Sandlot team into something huge.
He was doing everything. He was the doctor, he was the photographer, he set up the football fields. I mean, he was a walking franchise. Back at that time,
Leo Lyons kept a lot of Jefferson's memorabilia. Today, his great-grandson, John Steffenhagen, has items like a game-worn leather helmet, a team photo
of the NFL,
and the original NFL franchise certificate. But John says the people of Rochester weren't keen on professional football in the Flower City.
There was a lot of people who felt it was like they were the outlaws, they were the anti-college, anti-high school, they were the rough, there were a lot of injuries, very rough and tumble.
Financial problems and a lack of success on the football field forced the Jeffersons to disband as a team in 1925. But the NFL never forgot the efforts of Leo Lyons.
He would continue to collect football memorabilia because back then it was kind of like, well, this might take off, but he really felt strongly that it was going to be a pro league.
Nearly 40 years later, he was invited to the opening of the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
In 1963, in Canton, Ohio, when they were building the Hall of Fame, they came to Leo and he helped with supplying them with the pictures and memorabilia. He was there at the cake cutting ceremony.
What started as a Sandlot team in places like Edgerton and Bay Street Parks helped form the league that would captivate the nation. As part of the NFL's centennial celebration, one of the Saturday draft picks will be made live here in Rochester to coincide with the third day of the NFL draft.
From Rochester, New York, one of the NFL's 13 original towns.
The draft is feeling warm in Rochester this year, and a historic salute to this NFL hometown. The nation got an up-close look at the Flower City's football history today. It's the final day of the NFL draft, and in honor of the Rochester Jeffersons, one of the original NFL teams, all of the Buffalo Bills picks today were made from Rochester, and Rich Donnelly was there.
100 years after the start of the league, one of the biggest events on the NFL calendar, the NFL Draft, came to Rochester. The draft came to Rochester to honor the Jeffersons, one of the original 13 teams that formed what would become the NFL. Leo Lyons was the owner of the Jeffersons back in the 20s. His great-grandson, John Steffenhagen, still has a significant portion of Jefferson's memorabilia and says his great-grandfather would be proud to have the draft in Rochester.
It's great to see all the shirts with the Jeffersons on it, and what he wanted is to have pro football here in Rochester. And it's neat to see all this come to fruition now. The people that go, I didn't know the NFL was here. They played the Packers, the Bears, the Giants.
The Rochester draft party at the Cornhill Landing brought out many fans, including the grandson of one of the Jeffersons players. He brought his grandfather's contract. Players were paid $25 per game.
My family, myself, a lot of pride. I showed the contract to Darryl Talley. He could not believe it. He was sitting here reading it, and I think it's great.
I just got done looking at a guy's contract that was for $25. $25, and when they took tax out, he had 18.
The Bills Wall of Famer was in town to make the Bills' 5th-round pick. He also stayed to stand with Rochester Mayor Lovely Warren as she made the Bills' 6th-round pick. An important moment in the history of Rochester sports.
We stand on many shoulders, those of Susan B. Anthony, Frederick Douglass, but also the Jeffersons. And we also had an NBA team. And so when we think about Rochester and all the things that we had to offer here, our future is just as bright as our past.
a past that helped form the most powerful sports entity in America. In Rochester, Rich Donnelly, News 10 NBC.
Celebrating its 100th season, the National Football League has a rich tradition and history, and News 10 NBC's Rich Donnelly shares a story on how that history was preserved with the help of two former owners with ties to Western New York.
The Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio, houses the history of professional football in America.
They recreate their first game in 1920.
Right down to the printed minutes of the original meeting to form what is now the NFL. And Rochester Jeffersons owner Leo Lyons made sure that the Flower City would be part of the new league.
I think Leo had a large influence on the game, especially early on, and I think that came from his passion for the game of football.
John Kendall is the director of archives at the Pro Football Hall of Fame and has documented the importance of Leo Lyons' involvement with the history of the NFL.
Leo was integral in being involved with the league from an early, standpoint, and having his hand in helping make some of those early decisions that would lead the league to where it is today.
The Jeffersons folded less than 10 years into the formation of the NFL, but Leo Lyons stayed involved in professional football. And pillars of the game, like Vince Lombardi, came to his home in Rochester to hear his opinions about the game.
What was his stature in the league even 30 years after his franchise was defunct?
If you are going to dedicate your life to pro football and the National Football League like a Vince Lombardi would, why not know everything about the history? And when you want to know all the history of the league going back, who did you go to? Well, you went to the NFL's official historian, and that was Leo Lyons.
And in recent years, the league's history was saved by another important figure in Western New York sports. In 2011, 2 years after he was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, Bills owner Ralph Wilson Jr. donated more than $2 million to fund a preservation center at the Hall of Fame. Today, the Ralph Wilson Jr. Pro Football Research and Preservation Center is a climate-controlled environment that houses more than 40 million documents and more than 6 million pictures related to the history of the NFL.
He always was a supporter of preserving the history of the game, very similar to Leo Lyons, being able to continue to share the story of professional football.
Their NFL teams never faced each other, but the work that was started by Leo Lyons and continued by Ralph Wilson kept the history of the league alive.
We're honoring the heroes by preserving their legacies through their artifacts and documents, and then through their stories, we're able to promote the positive values that the game teaches: the commitment, the integrity, the courage, the respect, the excellence.
They owned NFL teams in Rochester and Buffalo.
Like, we have a letter from...
And their work has preserved the history of the NFL for generations to come.
That was Rich Donnelly reporting. The generosity of Ralph Wilson Jr. continues long after his passing in 2014. The Ralph Wilson Jr. Foundation funds many charitable efforts in Western New York, specifically those that promote healthy lifestyles and youth sports.